you for joining us this afternoon for, again, another part of our lockdown webinar series. I think we're in week 3 now. And today we're going to discuss PCAs and equity assessments, more than wear and tear. Is that changing?
No, sir.
I noticed it's changed on one computer or one screen and not the other. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay, so today it's going to be myself, Dan Weeks, and David Rainey is going to be joining me as well. Before we get started, again, thank you for joining us. Please remember to mute all the mics so we can avoid any background noises. If you do have questions, there's 2 ways we can handle those. If you don't want to forget it, you can write it down, or you can send us a message through the Zoom chat function, which I'm going to try to have up here so I can keep an eye on it. And then you can also, have the option to send it directly to the host or to everyone. Either way is fine, and we can address those kind of as we go if we see them, or towards the end of the webinar. And then you can also unmute yourself at the end when we get to the Q&A portion at the end of this presentation. And then also, we are not attorneys or financial advisors, so we will not be giving any legal or financial advice in our webinar. If you feel you need that type of advice based on any information presented in this presentation, we encourage you to reach out to your attorney or financial advisors. If you do not have one, we are happy to make recommendations. So today what we're going to do is we've talked about these 4 groups that we've heard in these previous lockdown webinars. Veridus group is comprised of these 4 primary divisions that deal with the construction and development industry. Today I kind of want to piggyback off of the webinar from last week and discuss the disposition of properties and maximizing the potential return on investment. So today's discussion, we are going to transition over to our building forensics division, where we will focus on, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here. Where we'll focus on the property condition assessments and equity assessments, and possibly discuss special investigations if any time permits at the end. During the webinar, we encourage everyone to ask questions if you have them as we go along by typing them into the chat, and we will. What's that? Good feedback. Okay, we'll do our best to answer them as they relate to the. Did we lose the screen?
No, Dan, it's fine.
No, I think you're
Okay.
fine, Dan.
Okay. Well, it is freezing up on me on my end, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on with it. So let's start in with what is the property condition assessment, or what is a PCA? This is a visual assessment of the overall condition of commercial property. In general, this is going to include the cursory review of construction plans, related information, the opinions of repairs, replacements beyond regular maintenance, expected remaining useful life of major systems and components, and then the life safety concerns, code issues, and any ADA accessibility issues. We'll get into that here just a little bit more, defined scope of what is included in the PCA in just a moment. But first, let's discuss who is requesting the PCA. So typically, we're going to have the lenders, insurance companies, and the real estate investment trusts. These are typically required because there's a loan involved. So to approve the loan disbursements, typically they are going to require a PCA. You're also going to get the real estate buyers and the investors. These are typically like cash deal for a property. The PCA is not necessarily required, but it's going to be highly encouraged, and it's more just for the buyer's peace of mind. And then thirdly, you can have your existing property owners, which they're going to probably use this PCA and report as a marketing tool or asset management. They'll use it as a guideline in budgeting for future repairs or upgrades to their property. So PCA, the scope that's going to be included in PCA is we're going to obtain some background information on the property prior to getting on site. We're going to interview the property manager, maintenance supervisor. That's a very important part of this, but we're trying to do this to review the maintenance history, the major capital improvements that have been done, but also discuss some of the planned improvements, the system replacements. And this will, when we're doing this background information on the property, we're trying to get the general age of the property, as well as any improvements. And this will actually help us, as we get into the different system components that we're going to talk about, identify the general age of those major components. And then while we're on site, we're trying to review the construction drawings that are being held on site, if they are, as well as any of the maintenance logs. It will also include a assessment of the site areas. So this is going to be our parking, asphalt and concrete paving, curbs and walkways, just kind of how much parking is provided, but then also the site drainage, lighting, landscaping, and any other site improvements that may be there, which the site improvements can include anything like loading dock ramps, trash enclosures, signage, any of those site amenities that are outside of the building. It's going to be a visual evaluation of the structure. So this will include kind of the structural integrity, the major framing systems and the components. And then any evidence of structural stress or differential settlement. Typically, we're looking for that by way of when we're on the interior, we're looking for cracks in the gypsum board, and then also any cracked concrete slabs on the floor at the lower floor level, or any floor levels that may have slope or elevation changes or anything that would show evidence of differential settlement. Then it's we're going to go into the assessment of the roof and the roof systems. So that is going to be typically what we're looking for there is when we first get out there, we're going to actually inquire with the maintenance personnel of any type of roof leaks, active roof leaks, things like that. And then we're going to review it from the exterior. We're going to look at the general type, size, age. And then, sorry, I've got things popping up on my computer here. And then the expected remaining useful life. We're going to look at any deficiencies, compromised roof areas, or evidence of roof leaks. And the evidence of roof leaks we're trying to do from after we get done with our exterior assessment, we'll go back to the interior. We'll look at the ceiling of the upper floor levels, and we're going to kind of identify any stained ceiling tiles, things like that, things of that nature. And when we see those that may be roof leaks, then we'll identify those on a floor plan, go back to the exterior, and review that general location on the roof again to identify, see if we can find evidence of the deficiency or issue that could be attributed to that roof leak. Then we're going to look at the exterior claddings. This is going to include the claddings are going to be like your brick veneer, CMU, EFS veneer, metal wall panels, siding, etc., as well as all the door and window systems. And here we're looking for any deficiencies, lack of maintenance, or issues of the transitions. Lack of maintenance Typically here is your sealant joints. It's going to be your brick veneer expansion joints. Could be glazing gaskets in your window systems, curtain wall systems, et cetera, things like that. And then it's those critical transitions that are between the doors and windows and the adjacent cladding systems, whether it's a sealant joint or it's through wall flashing systems or whatever it might be, but it's kind of those critical transitions. We're looking for any deficiencies or issues there. And then we're going to jump into the assessment of the HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and cooling. Really, on the mechanical side of things, we're looking for the general layout, the system. What type of system is it? Is it RTUs, rooftop units? Is it a water source heat pump system? Is it split systems? What type of system is it? What is the layout and location of the equipment that's part of that system? And then what is the size, general size, capacity, and the age? And then what is the expected remaining useful life? And typically we're looking at the age of the equipment versus the typical useful life of that particular type of equipment. And we do that extraction and we subtract that to get what we would call the remaining useful life of that equipment. And when we're doing this, we're not testing equipment, we're not turning equipment on, we're not running equipment. But if we see deficiencies or issues, we may recommend further evaluation by a mechanical contractor based on the condition and any potential issues that we've identified during that visual assessment. Then we get into the assessment of the electrical systems. Again, here we're looking at the general size, distribution with proper labeling, lighting, kind of how much power is coming into the building? How's that distributed, and is it labeled? And then the deficiencies here are typically unlabeled panels or potentially open panels. And then that we're looking above ceiling when we're getting in some of these other areas, looking for any open junction boxes, wiring concerns that could be a potential fire hazard. Then we'll get into the visual assessment of the plumbing systems. Here we're looking at just kind of reviewing the toilet rooms, the fixtures, water heaters, and we're just trying to identify, it's typically with the water heaters, that's your big items here, general size, age, again, the expected remaining useful life of those, and then any deficiencies or issues. Is there corrosion, any plumbing leaks, any strange plumbing issues as you see here. And then we'll get into the assessment of the vertical transportation, the elevators. Here we're looking at we're going to identify the type. Are they hydraulic or traction elevators? The general age and the capacity of the elevators. And then we're going to review the maintenance records. This is typically where we make sure that they're maintained, they're inspected. This is done either annually, quarterly, monthly inspections by an outside vendor. And then we're just looking for any deficiencies or any evidence of lack of maintenance. Have they missed a year during that maintenance period? Or are there issues like in the elevator machine room? Do we have compromised rated wall assemblies from drilling holes through them? Things like that. And then we'll get into the fire protection, egress, life safety. We want to review all the fire protection systems and the maintenance records. Again, similar to the elevators, there should be some sort of monthly or quarterly or annual inspection that's been done on these systems by an outside vendor. So we're looking for the record of that and identifying that. And then same with not only the sprinkler riser, but the fire extinguishers. And then we're looking for proper egress, exit signs, and emergency lighting. Make sure that while we're in the building, we can look around, we can see that there's exit sign from all areas of the building. There's no dead end hallways, anything that could be a life safety concern. And then while we're walking around, we'll typically on some of these emergency lighting units, we'll test those, make sure the battery backup systems are working, or make sure that they are connected in some manner to an emergency generator system. And then lastly, on these, we will look at the ADA accessibility and just what provision of accessibility has been provided. This kind of depends on the age of the building. If it's an older building, it may not have been updated. If it's a newer building, it's obviously going to have accessibility provided. But a lot of the older buildings have been updated now. And we'll review this from parking count to the parking type. Is it the van accessible spaces that are provided? Are the signage provided? We'll review the access aisles, the accessible paths from the parking coming into the building. And then we'll review the toilet fixtures, the sizes, the locations, and any other provisions as it relates to ADA. So we'll go through and we'll take dimensions and we'll identify any of the deficiencies or accessibility concerns that we see as we're walking around. So once we have all this information, it's a lot of time on site, a lot of notes, a lot of photographs, and we'll compile all this information into what we call PCR, into the report. So the report's going to include the general description of each of the systems, the layout, quantity, type, size, expected useful life, etc. And this report of findings, it can range anywhere from 40 to 100 pages, depending on the property age, building size, complexity of the systems, or the amount of issues or deficiencies that were noted. But we'll typically include the background information on the building, and then a comprehensive section within the report of each of these systems. And that comprehensive section will include this general description that we're talking about, the conditions noted during our assessment, deficiencies or issues beyond the typical maintenance is what we're looking for. And then our recommendations for repairs or replacements as needed. And this is kind of our professional opinion of how to resolve the issues. And sometimes we're even putting in options. So an example of that would be if a recent example I had was on a roof assessment. The roof was in decent condition for its age, but it was near the end of its useful life. So we put in there that you could get by with doing pretty significant repairs, and we provided what that would cost. But then we put in our recommendation was that really this roof is at the end of its useful life. We would recommend that it needs to be replaced in the next few years. So we'll put both of those in there, so then the client can take it and use either one of those of how they want to move forward with that information. And then the PCR will also include, most importantly, is going to include the executive summary with the rough order of magnitude. So this is where everything that's been noted throughout that report, we're going to put in this executive summary, and we've got these associated opinions of rough order of magnitude. So what we think the cost is going to be, the opinion of potential cost to repair or replace the deficiencies or the issues as noted. So as you can see in this one here, we've got, I think, 3 pages of this executive summary. And at the end of it, this is one of them that we have 2 different, we actually have an option in there. So we've got the total rough order of magnitude, and then we've also got the total rough order of magnitude with a roof replacement. So the one without the roof replacement is actually with significant roof repairs. So with that, the general purpose of the PCA and the PCR is to, 1, provide a general overview condition of the property. It's to identify the major issues that need resolved immediately, but then also identify the major systems or components that will require upgrades in the near future. We are going to provide the recommendations for correction, and then most importantly, provide that executive summary with our opinion of potential costs. So with that, I'm going to move it over to David Rainey, and he will talk about the equity assessment.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Dan. So I was going to ask a question right off the bat and get a raise of hands of people that would respond, but nobody has their video on. So if you could just pop in the chat room and give me an answer to this. But I'm curious, how many people have ordered a PCA before? Or on that matter, ordered an equity assessment? And I'm actually also curious who knows the difference between the two, and that's kind of where I want to jump in. So I want to be clear, first of all, the equity assessment, it covers all the areas that a PCA does. So the site, the structure, the envelope, the MEP, vertical transportation, life safety, all of that information is covered. Everything that Dan just went through is covered in the equity assessment. It even includes useful life tables, rough order magnitudes, opinions of probable costs, etc. And after that, that's kind of where it starts to differ. And really, the most common, one of the most, I guess, to start with, why an equity assessment over a PCA? And the most common is, what we've found is that these equity assessments are ordered on new construction or recently completed projects or remodels. A PCA could be on a project that is an existing building that could be, you know, a 1-year-old building or a 100-year-old building. But typically we find these equity assessments are on newer construction where somebody's going in and purchasing that building. Typically also they're higher asset purchases, so anywhere from $50 to $100+ million is what they typically value in our experience. In addition, the equity assessment also we include, I can't speak for other companies, but we include a warranty assessment as well. And typically you won't see that in a PCA. So what we'll do is actually go back to the specifications of the project, look at what was specified, if there was, what warranty was to be included on the different equipment. We'll go back, look at what the contractor actually provided to the developer, to the seller, whoever was constructing the building. Typically our clients, by the way, is the individual that's purchasing the buyer, if you will. And then we also follow that up with going back at the end of the warranty period. So after a year's passed, most of these warranties are 1 year. And we'll go back at the end of the year and actually do an additional assessment, go back on site, make sure that everything that there's no issues with anything. And if there are any issues, we provide a report and opinion back to the owner, and we hold the contractor and our developer team accountable. And then also, I think a big difference in these equity assessments over a PCA is really the lens that we're viewing this through while we're not only performing the actual assessment, but when we deliver the report and our opinions and recommendations. And it's really looking at it from the owner's perspective and keeping the owner's interest in mind throughout the whole process. And then finally, I think that as far as, at least I can speak from Veridus's point of view, and that's that we really try to become a valued member of that equity team. And what I mean by that is we know we're successful when that team brings us back time and time again. We're there not only providing a finding and a recommendation, a simple recommendation of, you know, this needs to be fixed by the contractor, but we're providing input back to the owner of what is the problem? How did this occur? Should it have been fixed as part of the construction process or remodel? Who's responsible for that? Is it a tenant responsibility? Is it a seller responsibility? Should it be something that they have an escrow account provided to them as part of the sale? So again, providing a real value in input information back to the owner. Dan, you can go ahead and switch. And so why get an equity assessment? Well, we've gone over a lot of it. I want to recap a couple points, but obviously, as we talked about, it's to determine the condition of the asset. But really what it does, in my opinion, is it gives information to the buyer to make informed decisions. And these reports are really put together in an exhaustive detail that is a tool for the equity stakeholder to not only to negotiate the purchase price, but also repairs, improvements, and also we can go back and they can go back and look at these reports 6 months, a year down the road, 2 years down the road. We have clients that on a single project, we've obviously done the initial equity assessment, but we've gone back and served them from that report a year, 2 years later, and can reference back to that information that we've provided. So in effect, that's kind of, that is really, that sums up what an equity assessment is. And Dan went over the PCA portion, which that is a bulk of what is in that equity assessment. So what I thought I would do is just, at this point, give some real world actual not recommendations, but some input on what we've actually found and provided value to our clients over the years. So this particular project, and I've purposely shown these particular photos so that I don't want to show the tenant or our client in any of these due to confidentiality. But this particular project was I think the original building was built back in the 1980s. This was an adaptive reuse, a remodel of this particular building for the tenant. A developer team and a tenant went through a design process for this. It was a complete gut. And I mean, they took everything out, new curtain wall system, roof, so the entire building envelope, interiors, mechanicals, etc. And there were a few VE items that had changed or that they took for value. Dan, if you'll go ahead. And again, I was kind of hoping that we could have some participation here, but, and I was even going to throw out for whoever wanted a lunch with Dan Weeks and David Rainey, who are two of the coolest guys at Veridus. Does anybody know what this is? I was going to ask that question. If anybody wanted to jump in and answer it or put it on chat, and I'll follow back up with you. But to answer it, it is actually a sight glass, and what it is, it's a piece of the mechanical equipment. This happens to be in a makeup area unit, and it's part of the circuit that the compressor is attached to, and really what it does is it allows you to tell the difference if the refrigerant is in good shape, if it's been contaminated, etc. So if that little dot is black, it's contaminated. If it's a fluorescent green, then the refrigerant is in good shape. So now you can all go through your buildings or potential buildings and open those up and look at the sight glass and know what that is. In this particular case, so that's the makeup. Go ahead, Dan, you can flip. So in this particular case on this project, what they had done is, like I said, this was a complete gut except for the mechanical equipment. So they kept in this project 8 makeup area units. I think there was a 150-ton water chiller, a cooled water chiller that they kept as well, which happened to be totally oversized for the space it was conditioning. And they did their due diligence. And I also want to be clear that VE happens in every project. It's just part of the process. As costs escalate, they try to find savings. In this case, they did some inspection and they determined that they were hoping that they could get some value out of the project by keeping this mechanical equipment in place. And what they found out, and what we found out actually, is that almost every one of these makeup area units, all of the compressors were in bad shape. All of the refrigerant was contaminated. Like I said, the chiller that served the one area was completely oversized. And the issue with that, everything else was replaced. So all the water source heat pumps were replaced. All the thermostats were brand new. Of course, they had a brand new building automated system. And so what was happening is, in this building, there were people sitting at their desks in the summertime with blankets wrapped around themselves. And they were too hot or too cold in the winter as well. And so through the process of providing this assessment and providing that value that I talked about to our owner, what we did was we went back and we actually created a responsibility matrix and looked at of the issues that we found on this particular project, what were the responsibility of the tenant, what were the responsibility of the owner. We put together basically a recommendation for how to go about repairing. If they wanted to keep this equipment in place, how does it get repaired so that as the sale happens and it transfers to the new owner, that they're satisfied that they have good equipment. We provided those recommendations and actually got a team on board to do those repairs, and also provided recommendations on startup for that equipment after the repairs are made. We even went and observed on site how the tenant was currently maintaining all of their equipment. And we looked at and we provided recommendations on how to on future maintenance of all of this. And then finally, we provided recommendations on if all of this was going to be replaced, what would that process look like and how would that happen? And as it turned out, there were a lot of wins for our client in this project, but they were able to negotiate with the tenant and the seller on getting some of this equipment replaced and some of it was repaired. But in the end, it worked out well for our client. So this next project is obviously an office building. It's a 10-story office building, 350,000 square feet that sat on top of a 2-story garage, which was a subgrade garage. And there were a couple items on this that we found. And this was a project that was actually under construction. I believe it was about less than 75% complete when we actually did our observations. And the first thing we found was that when we looked at the roof, there were some penetrations in the roof, and we observed just that there was some damage already. Construction hadn't even been completed. So we brought in some specialty inspections, which that's one thing that we can do that. So we'll put together our initial team, which would include somebody for the building envelopes, some specialists for the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And but if we run into something specific, we can, and we typically put in all of our proposals that we can bring in a specialty inspection anytime. So on this particular project we did find that there was significant damage to the roof. In fact, some of the insulation had been compromised. So as a part of that sale, the buyer was able to negotiate with the developer and get that roof partially replaced so that they took the building in good condition there. In addition, there were 2 hydraulic elevators on this project that served the lobby from the basement, from the parking garage. And this was actually something that they called us back for. And again, I go back to being that partner to our equity team. And so when this issue came up, it was about 6 months after they took possession of the property. Those 2 elevators were actually overheating and not performing right. And what we found out was, even though the building was at 50% occupancy, those elevators were getting about 1,400 trips each per day. And come to find out, as we dug into it again, I went back to the specifications. We looked at actually what was installed. We talked to the installer himself, to that company. And we found out that the elevators that were actually spec'd were more suited for ADA accessibility and light usage. They were not specified for a use that would serve the entire building at full capacity over 2,800, 3,000 trips per day. And so we went back and we provided recommendations, which included adding ventilation to the equipment room, or adding remote oil coolers, or even replacement. And in the end, of course, this, like I said, this happened about 6 months in, and they were able to go back. They were within a warranty period, and negotiate with that seller and got these fixed. And then finally, a second issue that I'm still on the other one, Dan, but that's okay. You can leave it there. It's fine. Again, they called us back. They had a glass issue. This was one of the biggest concerns for this client, was the amount of, this was all curtain wall, 100% of the glass, the facade. And from a previous project, they were very concerned about that. So from the onset, we brought on, as part of our team, curtain wall design, and they did a complete assessment of the curtain wall, the installation, everything prior to the purchase. And that all checked out okay. But what happened about, I think it was a little less than a year after construction was completed, one of the glass panes actually blew out. And what it was caused by, we brought in an inspector, they called us in, and it was a nickel sulfite inclusion, which no one could have, that's kind of an anomaly. That's something that you can't really detect. They do test for that when they manufacture that glass, but it's not something, if it passes that test, it's not something you can see or or mitigate that risk. It's just kind of what it is. But we were able to determine what that was and provide that value to the client. And then we've also had projects where this particular case here was, again, this was a complete renovation of this building structure, but as part of a VE item, they decided to leave the elevators, all of the equipment in place, and the only thing they spec'd was to have the actual elevator cab finishes replaced. And so, of course, we provided all the information the owner needed it, and as part of that negotiation, they, and some other items, they were able to get all of the elevator equipment, actually new elevators. They negotiated new elevators to be installed in the project before they purchased. And then the last example I have, which fortunately this did not end up being an issue for the buyer, but what you're looking at here is a condition we found where on the exterior facade of the existing building, which was being renovated, you see the brick, airspace, and then the gypsum board, and that's up against metal studs, which is the cavity and the bad insulation. What's missing in that photo is the vapor barrier. So in today's construction standards, and even back in the time that I think this was built back in the 80s as well, that would have been standard, but it wasn't present. And so we found a second location and determined that that was actually present all around the existing building. So we did some other tests. We did some water tests and found no intrusion of water. In addition, we looked at just visual evidence, and there was really nothing. And so as it turns out, this situation was okay for the owner, the buyer, as they took possession. But we did provide some recommendations that if things were to change, that continued maintenance on that facade, as well as penetrating sealer, etc. There were other ways to mitigate that risk. But the point was they were able to use going into that transaction, having their eyes wide open, and to be able to use this information to not only work with the seller on this issue, but also all of the others. So it's a tool bag for the owner to have all this information as they go into that negotiation. So with that kind of sums up the examples I wanted to bring up. And I guess at this point, Dan, I guess we'll open it up to some questions. I didn't get any comments on my question as to what that was, the mechanical piece. So I'm going to say that Brandy, since she is on video, is the winner by default. And Dean, I've not met you, Dean, but you've got a picture up at least of something. So I'm going to put you in there too in that category. So we'll go to lunch when this thing's all over with. Anybody have any questions?
So we did have one question come up during mine that I missed during the presentation on the PCA. The question was, what is the difference between a PCA and a home inspection? And so I say there's a lot of differences there. One of the big differences is from, say, the electrical standpoint, we're not going through and we're testing every single outlet like you would on a home inspection. There's a lot less to look at. But on the other hand, we are looking at the systems from a much deeper sense as far as the age, not only just deficiencies or conditions, but we're looking at it from the age, and then we're also providing kind of that pricing. The value there is really in that rough order of magnitude that we're providing of what is it going to cost, the issues that are identified, what is that going to cost to the client. So I think that's the biggest difference, is the value in that rough order of magnitude that's provided. Check our chat here, see if we've got
Alan, you can go with Brandy and I to lunch.
There's a few questions there from Tim Clark. Dan, can you see those?
Yes, testing and balance.
Testing and balance matter. I assume you're asking, does testing and balance obviously it matters. Dan, you want to?
So typically the testing and balancing is something that's going to be done probably more on the equity assessment part of things. It's kind of at the front end. If when we're during the PCA part of it, if we get some sort of feedback that there's issues or there's been issues with the building, then yes, we would put that in as part of our recommendations to have a test and balance, kind of like what I talked about with the mechanical. If we see issues, we'll actually recommend that a mechanical contractor go out and do a further evaluation, more comprehensive evaluation of that. So I would say that, but typically the testing and balancing is something that's going to be done on the front end right after the systems are installed, new systems, or as David said, if there's some BE and you've got new systems combined with existing systems, and how does that all work? That would be part of that, yes. Let me see here. I'm trying to go through the chat, all the important stuff here. Worried about the lunch here.
That's my priority.
When is the best time to request a PCA or EA during the due diligence? So on the PCA side of things, typically the best time, it depends on your due diligence period. Sometimes you see these really tight time frames of 30 days, but then you get into 60 days, 90 days. We always say get them as quickly as possible. You want to, the minute you are a client is interested in a property, and they feel like that's a property they're going after, I would say as quickly as possible, because it does take time. I mean, these assessments are between getting it scheduled, getting it on site, getting all your information, and getting a report put together. It's every bit of 3 weeks. Sometimes it could be 4 weeks, depending on how much is there and where the site's located. So as early as possible, it would be my advice on that. And David, if you got any more to add on the EA?
Yeah, so typically, especially for several of our clients, what we see is that as soon as they start getting that deal solidified, of course, before we can get onto a lot of these properties, we have to have access agreements, and we need to get insurance in place, et cetera. But really, once that due diligence period starts, then that releases us to get in there. And we typically have, like Dan said, we typically have less than 30 days to get this done before they go hard on the deal. So, but in my experience, it's been very quick, and that's one thing that, while it's not easy, sometimes we have had to in the past work very quickly and mobilize and get our team in place so we could meet the timeline of the client. But it is definitely during that due diligence period when we can get in there. So. Alan has a question. Do appraisers use PCA for appraisals?
Yeah, I can talk about that one. I was trying to get my mute button unmuted there. So Alan, on that one, as far as I know, they do not, and I don't think that they ever should. The PCA and essentially our rough order of magnitude is more based on deficiencies and issues and our professional opinions of what should be repaired or replaced based on their general condition. Never really has anything to do with the overall value of the building. But with that being said, it's something that I've dealt with some of my clients in the past. And I'll kind of piggyback this with another question that I've heard in the past of what is the PCA cost? What's it going to cost your client? And what I would say to that is there's a big range of costs. It can be as low as $5,000 on a small building. It can go all the way up to $40,000, depending on how much time is involved. But really, it's more of the value there. And so what I would say is not necessarily for the appraisal. Go ahead. Tim, you got something?
No.
Okay, so it's not so much for the appraisal of the property, but what I would say is the value we put into that report. I'll just give general terms. This is one that we had here in the last year was It was an approximately $10 million property, and that was for sale. They may have been going in with saying, you know, we're gonna offer $9 million for it. They get our PCA, they get the report from our PCA, and it comes up that we've identified about $2.5 million worth of issues or deficiencies. Now they'll go ahead and take that and they'll go back and forth during their deal, but really what it ends up being is the value. So they may have spent $15,000 or $20,000 on this PCA, but what they've done is they've reduced the cost of the purchase of the property by an additional $1 million. So it's really more the value, not so much the cost of the actual report that they're getting. So follow up on that. How long does one take, small building versus large building? As far as the PCA, a small building could be as short as 2 weeks by the time you get it under contract, get it scheduled, get out on the assessment, get all of your notes, all your pictures, everything, and then come back and put the report together. Typically 3 weeks is our minimum. It'd be a pretty small project to do 2 weeks. And then a larger building is 3 to 4 weeks typically is what that turnaround is. But we've always done everything we can. The biggest thing we always ask is we ask our clients, what is your due diligence period? When is that due diligence period over? When do you need to have this information? And a lot of times what we will do is we will get the information compiled. The report may not be final, but what we will do is we'll have that summary, that rough order of magnitude, and that executive summary put together of all the issues we've identified. We'll get that in front of them a week or 2 weeks prior to their due diligence period ending while we finish up the report. That way, if they have any questions, we can discuss that. But we're trying to get that information in front of them, and then we're going to do whatever we got to do to meet that deadline. Get it in front of them at least three days before that due diligence period is up, so they have that time to go back and forth in that deal. Another question here, generally speaking, how much liability is involved with equity assessments and PCA? I will say from the standpoint of the PCA, really both of these, the liability, what we put on here is there's not a lot of liability. We're providing a lot of information, valuable information for the owner, but at no point are we certifying that a roof is going to fail in 2 years or it's going to fail in 5 years. At no point are we certifying mechanical systems, things like that. We are given a professional opinion. So the liability, we've never really had one come back and say, look, the information just did not help us at all. We're trying to just provide the best and most valuable information we can for that client, but there really is no liability because we're not certifying anything. David, is there any more you want to add on that?
No, I'm glad you hit the certification point because that's important piece there. But no, I agree with everything you said. I don't, even when we go back and we look at, like on this particular project that had the issue with all the mechanical equipment that was left in place, and we went back and looked at all those recommendations and provided input on repairs. I mean, we did it in a way where the liability was placed back upon the contractor, and the liability was back on them to repair what was not done right to begin with. So yeah.
Thanks.
Tim Clark had a message, I think you missed that one, about control assessments, upgrades on systems as to Microsoft licensing. I assume you're asking, Tim, if you're looking at controls, building automated systems, are these upgraded? Are you looking at communication between old systems and new, or?
Tim, you can jump on and unmute yourself and ask that question if you want.
Because I guess I can jump in and answer that, like in the case of one of our projects, so we had a lot of old equipment that was 20 plus years old, and we had a brand new building automated system we had, which communicated great with the new water source heat pumps, thermostats, they had 2 brand new cooling towers. all of that worked seamlessly. The problem was that the new building automated system would not necessarily communicate. It was either all on or all off, or on some of the other equipment. And so there was just that, it was just did not work. So I think some of the newer, I don't think Mark is on the call right now. He has a lot of mechanical background, but I know some of the newer building automated systems and equipment, they do work well with each other. And again, a lot of that is based upon what the building automated system is doing. Some of these mechanical pieces, they all have variable frequency drives now, so you can vary the amount of airflow, etc. But hopefully that answered your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, this is Tim. Yeah, my question was, so that was kind of part of it, but the other part was, I've been involved with some projects up in this area here in Lafayette, where whether it be KMC, Train, Siemens, usually are the three that once you get to a certain life expectancy of those control systems, they upgrade their system enough that the old system does not talk back to the new. As Microsoft continues to upgrade their systems, at some point they cut that off, that the old system will no longer work with the new Microsoft system, and it becomes a big issue.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I don't disagree. If you want, like I said, I wish Mark was on here because he could probably bring more value to that, unless Dan, you can, but I can certainly get some more information. But I think you're absolutely right that a lot of these systems, when they're upgraded, make the older ones obsolete as well. They don't communicate back and forth between systems very well. So we have seen some of those issues for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Real quick, Tim Clark, you still on the brief? Did you get control of the screen?
No, it's blank now for me. Only thing I can see is pictures of whoever's got their picture up.
Okay.
No, it's still your screen, Dan, for whatever reason. So
I sent it over to him, but let me.
Alan had another question on a design build. Can you all do a life cycle reports on specified equipment? I'd say the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Pull that back up here. Yeah, we've done life cycle reports and even kind of a 10-year assessments, kind of what is that life cycle cost going to be on a lot of those major systems. And again, that's just based on the remaining useful life, the age of the systems, general condition, and then what is their typical expected useful life, and what is that remaining useful life left on it. So we could definitely do that on a life cycle report of different systems for the building. I'm gonna try to give you control here.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, Tim, we got you.
Okay. Can you guys just send me a copy of the whole slide presentation?
Sure. Yep. We'll make sure you have that.
Okay, that's all I needed.
Okay.
Any other questions? I appreciate all the
Okay.
questions. It's been great.
Great job, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you guys.
All right. Enjoy
Have a
your
good
day.
one.
All right.